Hello. Heads are coming up, that's good. Right, welcome to the session. Thank you to the sponsors, one of which is us, this one. Today I'm going to talk to you about something I haven't talked about before, at least not at a conference, combining pretty much both my passions, aviation and cloud security, into one talk. So you're the first ones to experience this before I'm going over to Europe to do this at a few other conferences. So hope everybody's happy to be the guinea pig today. Who am I? I'm going to be walking a bit because I have to hold this and walk. So who am I? David O'Brien. If you don't think I've met anybody here, but I'm also terrible with faces. So I'm that guy. Well, actually, no, I am. It's a very recent picture. I'm the founder of Argos Cloud Security, a cloud security startup specifically for consultants. If you're not a consultant, probably not for you. If you are a consultant, come find me. We do cloud security assessments for you, basically, as a service. You can find me all the way on the internet. I refuse to call it X, by the way. It's the Twitter. Even they use twitter.com, so I'm not sure why we are supposed to call it anything different. Been a pilot for over 20 years. Got a couple of hours under my belt by now. Been traveling all over the world. There's not an Australian accent, you can probably tell. I'm originally from Germany, half Scottish. I've been living here for 10 years now with my little family. And before my disc injury last year, I've been doing quite a bit of strongman training, thanks to my Scottish heritage, probably. So yeah, if you do want to get in touch, I'm around. That was part of the template, at least the header was part of the template, and it was supposed to be one. I'm very strongly opinionated, and I couldn't stick to one controversial cloud opinion. I'm not going to go into any of them in detail. I could do a talk, probably a whole day, about all of them. But yeah, anyone that sticks out where you think BS or not true, or David, what are you talking about? This is going to be a very interactive session, by the way. Especially later on, I'm going to ask you to work with me. Anywhere you disagree? Anybody in disagreement with one of them? Cool. All right. So this whole session is going to be a bit of a story. Nothing that has happened to me personally, but a bit of a story, hopefully. And in the end, what we want to get to is some sort of root cause analysis and what can we do as an industry to just get better. So something happened. AI generated, yeah, we've had all these AI sessions today. This is not an AI session. After this, no more AI. And as you can tell, I asked it to create a picture of a Cessna 172 that had an accident. Weirdly, I thought that wing is in the wrong place, the right wing, from your side, the left, yeah. But then I thought, well, it had an accident, so probably all right. But yeah, what happened? And typically after an incident like that, a process kicks in. And depending on which country you're in, different government bodies or different industry bodies take over. And over the last 100 and something years that humanity has been flying, we've had many, many accidents, right? And if you look at these stats here, they start in the 1960s and go all the way to pretty much now. And I'm fairly certain you're also going to get the slides, so the link to that Airbus report is here. You can see that when we started flying, or when the jet age started in the 1960s really, or the commercial jet age started, a lot of things went wrong. Yeah, I mean, we now had a few AI sessions this morning. A lot of things will be going wrong with this. Yeah? We shouldn't be hiding from that fact or ignore that fact. A lot of things with AI will go wrong. And that's what happened with aviation as well, flying. A lot of things initially went wrong, and this is accident rate per million flights. So you still had to be unlucky to be on a fatal flight with 11-ish flights initially. But nowadays, we're at 0.07 accidents per 1 million flights. Pretty good. I didn't calculate the ratio, but we're doing pretty well. All of that has to do because we implemented these processes to review what has actually happened. Every time something happens in aviation, commercial and private, a report gets filed. Every single time. I know someone who, a couple of weeks ago, for certain reasons, landed after dark without a night rating, here in Melbourne, actually. They had to file a report. Nothing happened. But they had to file that report in order for overall our industry to learn and figure out what went wrong, not to blame that person. That person is not going to get punished or anything. They self-reported, and now people are going to investigate what happened. How did we get to that point, and how can we make sure it's never going to happen again? Or ideally, not as often. In IT, however, if we look at the last couple of years, we don't really have numbers of how many, unfortunately, and that's one of the issues, yeah, of how many data incidents we had, or cyber breaches, or whatever you want to call them. IBM here has a report from last year. They called it the data breach report, or cost of data breach report. And that cost is only going up. That's not cloud specific. That's no matter where, right? So that's only going up. Here's a bit of an overview, same report, of what happened, how many times, and how expensive each one of these breaches, kind of on average, was. We can see cloud misconfiguration, not that expensive, but also this is in millions of dollars per incident. Yeah, so you're a small company, you're still gonna on average be hit with $4 million US dollars here. But it happened a lot. Yeah, after phishing, actually BEC, I thought business email compromise would have been a bit further to the right, but doesn't matter. So cloud misconfiguration is still number 3-ish of how often that happens. Lots of text. There's a few things on here that I just wanted to briefly go into. I'm just assuming everybody's been on a commercial flight before. Anybody who hasn't been? Okay, cool. Not a problem. I know plenty of people that have never left their own state, which in Australia means you've never flown. So there's a few things, and I just want to highlight them because something happened on a flight, and it doesn't matter where that happened, the whole industry changes. One thing happens, and the whole industry adapts to make sure that never happens again. So there was Qantas One, which back in the 1990s actually went via Bangkok. Qantas One is the kangaroo route going Sydney to London, and they did have a stop in Bangkok, interestingly. So that would have been a 747. I can go on and on and on about planes, by the way. So they landed in Bangkok, and they had an issue, and they had to evacuate. Unfortunately, That evacuation didn't go according to plan because the people in the exit rows had no idea what to do. Has anybody sat in an exit row recently on a flight? Yeah. What happens? The flight attendants come to you, look you in the eyes, and go, are you comfortable with doing this and this and this and that? And if you got headphones in, they make you take them out. They make sure now everybody, and this is unfortunately an Australian change at this point. In the US, very different. In Europe, kind of depends on the airline. But people are now briefed, so we understand what we need to do in case something happens. And that's that's an additional safety briefing. That's not part of the normal safety briefing. An aircraft at night used the wrong lights to line up with the runway for takeoff, not for landing. That happened in Cologne, Germany, a couple of years ago. And that review into that incident is now likely going to change the lights, the LED lights, at every single international airport in the world. That one little incident. So this never happens again. Germanwings 9525, or anybody not familiar with that one? Okay. Mental illness across the population is a bit of an issue. We can probably all relate to that in some way, shape, or form. And that co-pilot, unfortunately, had mental health issues. And because we treat mental health with a bit of a stigma, or attach a bit of a stigma to it here in our society, treatment of that is a bit of a problem. And especially as pilots, I can tell you, I mentioned I had a disc injury last year. I'm still struggling with it, unfortunately. And there's certain medication you can get, pain medication, nerve pain medication, which is, and I learned that unfortunately too late after I took that medication, which is also used for mental health problems. The moment we pilots take that first tablet, we're grounded. How many people, apparently, I'm just going to answer, around 20% of people in the population have disc issues and have injuries that are treated with certain pain medication. A lot of them are also pilots, because we sit a lot. Imagine how many have also mental health issues and don't want to take that medication because they'd be grounded right away. So that was one issue why that pilot, one aspect of it, why that pilot didn't want to go and get the medication, use the medication. When he was on it, he was fine with. Runway incursions, lots of people, you've been to busy airports, you see one plane landing, the next one rolling onto the runway, taking off. Lots of busy aircraft, lots of busy runways. The air traffic controller tells you, line up and wait, or line up and depart. Or line up after the next landing. So a lot of times at busy airports, the air traffic controller tries to save time by just telling that aircraft, while the frequency is clear, hey, just behind the next landing, line up. Our human brains aren't very good with actually filtering information, hence AI. And what we found was that a lot of planes actually taxied in front of that landing aircraft and just taxied onto the runway and waited for that actual takeoff clearance. Because all the pilots had, while they were doing their checklists, while they were busy doing the things, was line up. They forgot or missed behind the next aircraft, behind the landing traffic lineup, which is now why every time you get that clearance, it's behind the next landing aircraft, line up and wait, behind, across the world. Because it happened a couple of times, reviews showed that was the issue. Now everybody needs to do that. And also people just use the wrong fuel for aircraft. We all use different kinds of fuels depending on propeller-driven, injected, turbine, jet engine. Use the wrong fuels, now they're colored. And if you put the wrong color in, you should already know, or if, at least after you've put it in, you're supposed to test, put a bit of a test stick in and see the fuel. At least at that point, you should realize that's the wrong color. I probably shouldn't take off because my engine's going to quit probably once I've taken off, because it never happens on the ground. So all of these examples are from all over the world that impact everybody across the industry. Now, I found a few just IT incidents that happened. And the first one, Midnight Blizzard, has anybody not heard of that issue? That, I don't want to say the Microsoft issue, because then a clever person might ask, which one? Midnight Blizzard, I've actually linked to the Microsoft security blog, because that slide I did before the CSRB report came out. I highly recommend reading the Cyber Safety Review Board's report on that incident. Essentially, to the best of my understanding, in this case, a key got stolen, an encryption key or a signing key got stolen, and with that key, the attackers, in this case, supposedly the PRC, were able to sign tokens, create tokens, and authenticate against Microsoft APIs to get into people's email accounts. This one is an anonymous one, just because you might be able to search for it. A global admin used global admin privileges while browsing while using their computer at home. That computer, unfortunately, was compromised. The people on that machine were able to get the token out of the cache and then go on their merry way into the environment. Football Australia, that's an AWS example. They stored the AWS access keys for an S3 storage bucket in the HTML code. And another one that actually a friend of mine over in the UK gave me was a SSRF attack, server-side request forgery attack, on a public website, a VM, which allowed pretty much script execution on that website or web server to then allow people to steal a short-term token to then create resources in their cloud environment. And then also, so they use crypto mining. I'm not sure why people do that, because they never last very long, but they racked up a $12,000 bill per day by just spinning up infrastructure in that environment, and then also use that infrastructure to DDoS other, or essentially become part of a botnet. These are only a few examples I was able to find. Unfortunately, I couldn't find too many more that were published. And that's one of the issues that we're going to talk about later on a bit, that we don't publish these things. And we're afraid of, I don't know what, but we don't publish if something goes wrong, which is why all of these have probably already happened hundreds and hundreds, probably thousands of times. The S3, the public, this wasn't even a public S3 bucket, right? I found one where you at least had to do an F12 on a website to find the AWS access key. But there's plenty. Did anybody get the F12 joke? US hacking, yeah, the people thought that was hacking. If you pressed F12 to view the source. Anyways, these were all examples of where you actually had to do a little bit of work. Anybody familiar with Shodan, Shodan.io? Or not familiar? Shodan.io, they typically have a sale once a year, $5 lifetime access. Pretty much what Shodan is an internet scanner. They scan the internet, and you can then query the internet for what is out there. And I haven't done it recently or too recently, but last time I checked for RDP on the internet in Australia, I got a couple of thousand hits. RDP on the internet here in Australia only. That means there's a few thousand VMs, Windows VMs, with RDP open on the internet. And I think that's important to let that sink in, especially also on Shodan, really, really handy. And Shodan is not anything dark web or hacking or anything. It's just an internet scanner. But what they also do in a lot of cases, they give you a screenshot of the actual VM that's on there. So you can see who logged on last. And then if you then had any malicious intent, go, David tried to, or user one tried to log on, and you already know, okay, that's probably a shared VM, and can then go and guess. Or you can see the domain name, the domain.net BIOS name on that logon screen, and go, all right, that IP belongs to that company. Super handy, especially if you then want to go and tell people, hey, by the way, your VM is on the internet. Did you know? Most people don't know. And you can tell I've not really scripted this talk before. I digress a little bit. But as an industry, I think we do live in our little bubble where we go and Defender for Cloud and Sentinel and all of these and AI, and that's amazing. But this is the real world. Most people, like the majority of our industry, do not have any of these tools. The majority of organizations in our industry do not have you or me or other people that are even slightly interested in security. And that's how that happens, how these things happen, because shit needs to get done. And with that, I just wanted to have a bit of a demo before we go into the so what bit. Unfortunately, my demo crapped itself this morning. I sat back there, connected everything up. Great, everything worked. Yeah, the last test before the session. I walked up to level 5, tested the same thing again, no luck. No network change, nothing, just wouldn't work anymore. I pinned it down to the Azure load balancer not working anymore for some reason. But, well, what can you do?
Maybe somebody fixed the security issue of that website?
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, that would have been nice. So what I'm doing is a bit of a workaround. So we have that VM is a website. That VM that I've just briefly shown you for a sec is a public website. And if you're hosted on the cloud, you're known to everybody. Yeah, I think that's something that a lot of customers of mine do not understand. If you're hosted on the cloud, your public endpoints are known to everybody on the planet, because the Azure and AWS and GCP IP ranges are public. So if you have a public IP, your IP will be scanned and tested, and to your point, maybe somebody did actually fix the security issue. Within seconds, your IP will be scanned. Yeah, Shodan might scan your IP. Nice security companies might be scanning your IP, but also not so nice people might be scanning your IP for security issues. And let's just assume I found this IP here, and I'm just gonna do not that, but So I found the IP 20 dot something, that's an Australia East data center IP. And I found there's a website on there, there's a website listening on there, and it's probably, yeah, you can tell, fetch something. I realized that website has an SSRF vulnerability. Typically what that means is somebody programmed the web server or something, the API listening on that VM, to execute something they shouldn't have been able to execute. So if I go and just briefly show this here, because that's my workaround, I'm going to do all of this now locally. So I just curled the website here on the left. That's my little web server, a Flask, Python Flask website. And it responds. Yeah? Fetch is a valid API endpoint. It's supposed to be fetching something, probably in a database somewhere, or maybe a product, yeah, something. However, because I realize it has this SSRF vulnerability, I'm just going to try and see if I can have it execute something else. Like, does anybody know what that IP here is? What that does? Yeah, so it's the IMDS. So it's the instance machine D service. So what it is, it's a locally NATed IP that talks down to the fabric. And if I can talk to that IP, and that's all by design, by the way. Yeah, talking to that IP is by design. All cloud providers give you that capability. AWS has done it for since I've been doing it, 14 years. GCP and Microsoft. Microsoft has released it a couple of years ago. And you can get a lot of information about a VM. And now I'm going to see if I can. About a VM, if you did that call, like for example, I can see the admin username on that VM. The actual demo was to do it from Postman, from this internet connected, to show you I can get my web server to execute that URL on my behalf. That's the actual, like I said, unfortunately I have to do the workaround from localhost, but I can see many, many things. I can see tags. I can see the owner is that email address. Other people might have owners as employee ID. Yeah, these are all interesting information for somebody to have if they try to impersonate somebody, for example. Yeah, you now know, you probably already know the company because you're attacking their website. Now you know maybe that person's employee ID. You call HR up and go, hey, can you maybe reset my password? Oh, what's your employee ID? Oh yeah, here, whatever, right? And you might be in. Many other things in here. Anything else that's of interest? Probably not. Well, IP addresses, my public IP, my private IP. Interesting stuff. Now, everybody familiar with managed identities? Who's not familiar with managed identities? Good. A resource in the cloud can now have an identity. I say now on Azure because it's only been for a few years now. I can give a resource an identity. And then that resource can use that identity to execute other APIs. For example, I can have my virtual machine talk to a storage account and put something into a storage account blob or create a blob. Or I can have my virtual machine, I can have a function, an Azure function app with an identity, and that identity can talk to a database. I don't have to hard code, or not even hard code, store any credentials anywhere anymore, because the identity now, it's an intra-ID identity, and that identity has a short-lived token, and it gets that token from our IMDS endpoint. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to show you what that might look like. Yeah, always imagine I'm doing this from not localhost, but I'm doing that from the internet, if the Azure load balancer had worked. And now from the internet, I asked this API to give me a token. And that's a bearer token I can now go and use, for example, to go here, paste that in, and I can have a look at the decoded token. I can see lots of interesting information. I can see the EXP, the expiration, like how long is it valid for. I can see the subscription ID of that thing that I'm currently on. Yes?
Sorry, can you repeat the part where you're actually fetching the token? Because
Yep.
you don't have an app ID, how can you get a token?
I don't need the app ID because the resource, my virtual machine, has that identity attached to it. I just go and talk to that 169.254, 169.254 IP with a certain path, and then automatically that identity will give me the token. I don't need an app ID. If I'm on that VM, or indirectly, yeah, via that SSRF, if I can get access to a resource that has this identity attached to it, I can do whatever I want.
Oh, okay, so you imagine that you have got the access first and then you...
Yeah, but the access in this case is I have access via that website. I'm not on that VM.
Yeah, you know. Yeah.
I'm not on the VM. I'm just misusing a misconfiguration in that web server. And I'm having the web server call another URL on my behalf. That URL just happens to be on that web server and is the identity endpoint and gives me that token.
So won't the token be encrypted?
No, the token is not encrypted because otherwise you will not be able to use it. You need the token in clear text. In order to do something like this here. Yeah, so it's encoded, correct, sorry. But correct, not encrypted. So I can now use that token to call something like this. I can call a REST API, an Azure REST API from pretty much wherever I want to create a VM. And all I have to do is give it a bit of a JSON body. Yeah, if you've written ARM templates before, that's pretty much your ARM template, your ARM body. And all I need to do in here, paste the token in, say send, and for some reason, My network down here is really not happy. What's it saying? Resource. Right. Because get, sorry. Put. There we go. That VM is currently being created.
So what happens if the token of this managed identity was created by lazy admin and can do anything you want?
Yeah.
Yeah. It has access to everything.
Yeah.
And using this token create a new infrastructure.
Yeah. So if I now have access to it, correct? So I have that token, I have access via that SSRF vulnerability to get a token to learn about the environment. Yeah, like I said, there's tags that I have access to, IP ranges I have access to, subscription ID. I can go and test whatever I want, get a token, and I can just try out and see what happens, what I can do.
Sorry, it can be a stupid question.
No, not stupid question.
So from token perspective, in secure deployments, tokens are kept encrypted, right? Or is it?
No, this is a bearer token,
Okay.
and it's a short-lived token. Yeah, so I would have to, in an hour, I would have to go back and get a new token, but they're not encrypted. They're encoded, to your point, and I can but I don't have to decode it. Yeah, I just pasted it in as the authentication header, and I'm good to go.
Just a generic question, actually. So currently, Azure DevOps supports using managed identity from SDN-AD. So based on this, probably not recommended to use.
Not what I'm saying. I'm not saying do not use managed identities. Not the takeaway. The takeaway is very much do use managed identities. Please do. But the things you do have the managed identities on, protect them as your crown jewels, especially Azure DevOps. Azure DevOps self-hosted agents, there was a session this morning on that one. Do not put them onto the internet, because Azure DevOps, by definition, has got access into your environment. It needs that because it needs to deploy the whole lot, right? So absolutely, if somebody gets onto your DevOps agents, and we've seen that time and time again, build agents, they're the access, the really, really, protect them. There was.
Yeah, so did you say that this whole thing happened because the application or the web application is hosted on a VM that has a public endpoint?
To a degree, yes, maybe. I have said that this whole thing happened because it's hosted on a VM with a public endpoint, to a degree. The actual issue is that the web application itself doesn't do proper validation of input validation. It's an SSRF vulnerability that can be caught by certain WAF, that can be caught by custom WAF policies. It's a known vulnerability, but it happens over and over again. So it's not just because it's on a VM. I'm not a big fan of VMs anymore. I've probably by now deployed hundreds of thousands of them. They have their use case, but here specifically, the issue is because it's the web server that's misconfigured. I just wanted to show what can happen if you have something like that in your environment. One more question, and then I'm...
Yeah, it won't take long, and if
Yeah.
the answer is longer, we can take it offline.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm still not convinced. Like, if you are getting bearer token, there might be on Azure part, you might have an app registration, and where you can define what you can do with that token as well.
Sure, the token, the identity requires a role assignment, absolutely. In this but without a role assignment, the identity is useless. The identity will always have a role assignment. Happy to take that offline. That's all right. Cool. So I think I've got 16 more minutes. I think that this is fun so far. People enjoying this?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Very good. So after an incident, in aviation, as I said, these reports get published. They work on them, they spend millions of dollars probably on creating these reports. Here are 2 examples, UPS 6, Dubai to Cologne, had a bit of an issue and unfortunately crashed. Germanwings 9525, similar. These reports are hundreds of pages long. They get very, very, very detailed. To me as an aviator, very interesting. I would love to see this in our industry. But how to approach this? And how do they approach this in aviation? These investigations, to my example earlier, that guy that landed after dark, it's not about the person. Yeah, the person might get looked at, but it's not to blame the person. And very quickly, as humans, unfortunately, we are about to blame. Yeah, we go on the head. And it's that person's fault. And if that person hadn't done this, everything would have been fine. And yeah, it's this unbiased, just culture approach. And just wanted to paint the picture before we go into the next step. Imagine you're at a very typical typical organization, not IT organization, typical organization with an average-sized team, IT team. Yeah? Most of the time, that means that IT team looks after a visual, I was about to say whatever this is, a visual presenter, of phones, printers, and the cloud. Yeah? That's the typical organization on our planet Earth at this point. And that IT team was told, hey, you need to provide the sales team with some infrastructure so we can move our currently on-prem, behind the firewall VM into the cloud so they can put the product website on there. And then a month after they launched, the thing happened that I've just shown you in the demo. Finance actually goes, hold on, what happened to our cloud invoice? Like, what's happening? What are you doing? And they go, I just deployed that one VM. And then I had to go and run to JB to get, I don't know, a new adapter. And then I had the printer, and yeah, nobody looks at these things anymore. And this is really what happens. It's never one thing. Yeah, I had my personal aviation incident, and it wasn't one thing. It was the last thing that kind of aligned the Swiss cheese. Yeah, you have all of these issues on the left, and you hope to have all these other filters and processes and people and technology in place to catch something as far left as possible, but at some point, all the holes in the Swiss cheese align, and one thing gets through. In aviation, that's, I don't know, you get a stupid email in the morning, and that email means you're too late to leave to the airport, and on the way there's roadworks, and one stupid person cuts in front of you, and you're so preoccupied with that email still, and you go through your checks, but you miss that one thing in that checklist. But I've been doing this for over 20 years, I'm still here. You get into the aircraft, and you missed that one thing, you take off, and you crash. All of these things had to align for me to miss that one thing. And in IT, yeah, we finally, CPS 234, here in Australia, we have people finally accountable at the very left if something goes wrong. Yeah, it took us a while to get to that point, but we finally have people accountable, and unfortunately that means interested in making sure that things do not happen. Yeah, again, us humans, if we don't have a negative motivator, we just don't do it. As a general rule, we won't do it. Nobody, any of these skyscrapers in our CBD, not one company is going to spend a single dollar on security if they don't have to do it. That's just, unfortunately. Going back to my very, very first slide, yeah, security for most people is just compliance. That's an empty slide. There's nothing on there. Just wanted to, like, how do you think? Like, yeah?
Yeah, I have a bit rhetorical question.
Yeah.
So, the regulation, as I understood, the overall thought is like we need a bit more regulation in the industry that's going to be similar to what we have in aviation. And then the rhetorical part of it, I think I can imagine if the regulation was there in 2000s, cloud wouldn't even happen because it's probably going to be so regulated towards security, like keep everything on your premise, hardware only, never trust your data to someone else. So where is this balance? You will get further down the line. Where is this balance between regulating everything? I can imagine that it's important in aviation because it's people's life. But the whole internet was built slightly different.
Sure.
Purpose.
Sure. Also not talking about the internet. So yeah, but so overall for the recording question, just to summarize that, would we just pretty much block ourselves if we overregulated and nothing in the cloud would ever happen? Because in aviation, there's people's lives at stake, and in IT, they're not.
So not directly.
So that's interesting. Happy to talk about that later on. But Medibank, yeah, people killed themselves over having their data leaked. The Finnish psychiatry clinic where data got leaked, people killed themselves over that. So we have hospitals ransomed left, right, and center at the moment. People die. So we do have responsibility for people's lives. Absolutely. I think that I've worked with supermarkets, insurances, all over the world. And they all go, we're the IT team. Like, yeah, who cares if the server's not online tomorrow morning? Or if it's not that important, that data. It's important to someone, and people might react in certain ways. And I get that. I get your stand, right? It's not like we do something and that person dies. It's not the immediate effect of it, but I think we do have that responsibility. We do need to think differently nowadays, especially with our blast radius being so much bigger nowadays when we do this. Yeah?
One caveat to your presentation. I would say like we more aligned to the automobile industry rather than aviation with the IT infrastructure. We're not, we don't have enough resources and money to support all the investigation that happens there. So we are more like about like cars, and nobody is investigating any single incident of each car. Maybe sometimes like large incidents, but in general we don't investigate each car crash. So maybe Azure VMs is more like a car industry than aviation.
Okay, so the cloud or our IT industry, just summarizing we should align ourselves more with the automobile industry.
More realistically, pragmatically.
Interesting. I do have to rush a little bit. So any things where you think something like that wouldn't happen, and that if I had more time, if I hadn't rabbled on this much, I would have probably asked, so what processes, what could we have done to maybe prevent something like that from happening, that SSRF attack? Homework. Come to me, find me on Twitter, let me know. So what is our industry doing? And in the US, I've mentioned the CSRB. They just published the other Microsoft report. They do not have any subpoena power. Everybody working with them purely because they want to at this point. But they also know that if they didn't work with them on these reports, like if Microsoft hadn't worked with them, the CSRB has been implemented by executive order by the US president. There's a lot of weight behind this. And if they recommend something, the industry kind of needs to follow. And the interesting thing is they're US, right? And still, we feel the impact here to a degree. The ACSC here in Australia, also not a regulator, and also not very vocal when it comes to incidents that we have. I think David's opinion, a good start, but really just a drop in the ocean with where we, I think, should be going. So a few thoughts that I put up here. The expectation of these cyber incidents, we don't expect them to have any reports to come out after. We as the IT industry, if we see somebody getting hit, we don't expect, okay, in a month there's an initial report, and in 6 months, or maybe in 12 or 18 or 24 months, there's a final report and we can all learn from it. That's not a thing, very, very rare. The first one I can remember is GitLab years and years ago, which wasn't even a cyber incident, was just somebody copying the data the wrong direction. But what I'm missing in our industry is that we don't seem to learn from other people's mistakes as a whole. We repeat them over and over and over again. And vendors, I am representing a vendor today, but vendors just need to stop ambulance chasing. If we look back at that Swiss cheese picture, it's not about that one thing. It's not about you could have found the XZ, listen to the podcast about the XZ, Americans, the XZ vulnerability. No, you couldn't have. Or maybe you have, or you might have, but it wouldn't have changed anything. Yeah. As vendors, we need to look more into how can we actually help, not just the bottom line. Can anybody remember after an IT incident that happened somewhere that fundamentally something changed? The last thing probably was Midnight Blizzard, that we now have log access for, 60 days instead of 30? Great. But yeah, fundamentally, even Microsoft gets hit. And there's nothing that changes. We don't seem to change our behavior. And something that, as a startup founder, I found very interesting when I found out about that concept, pre-mortems. Yeah, people do post-mortems sometimes about certain things, but pre-mortems. Just imagine, lock yourself into a room with your team and go, we had a cyber incident. What happened? What went wrong? Look at your environment. Have an assessment of your environment. What might have gone wrong that you got hit? And see what you can change. You don't have to change everything, but there might be something in there, might be processes, might be technology, might be people. But approach it from that unbiased, just culture, really just trying to figure out what it was. And with that, I hope that was interesting to you, seeing maybe that overlap where we might be able to get to. By the way, none of the FAA is a bit different, but none of these aviation bodies are actual regulators, the ones that investigate. They're not regulators, they're not law enforcement. None of them actually make law or change law. But still, if they say something, people listen. And I think that's where we need to get to. It doesn't have to become law or a new regulation, but we should help each other, uplift everybody. And without context, that could apply to everything. Thank you very much.